Hi there. I'm re-recording this part of the video and I'm going to insert it as the first clip because in listening back, for some reason there's a strange buzzing sound through the first part. So I'm here to talk about some books that I haven't talked about before because I read them before I started a Booktube channel, and some of them before I had a Bookstagram channel, because I didn't know either Bookstagram or Booktube existed until the summer of 2022. I know, it sounds weird, but true. So I really wanted to share these books with you and my experience reading them because they mean something to me, and I just want to share the love. And I'm very interested to know if any of you have read any of these books and what your experience has been. Okay, so the first one, I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk about Infinite Jest. So I read this book, I think in the summer of 2022, and it took me off and on like the whole summer to read. I just think that your first time through this book will be entertaining, but it is challenging in that you have to learn David Foster Wallace's way of writing. You also have to get into the rhythm of going to each footnote that he refers to. That's the fun of this book, is that the whole back section is footnotes, notes and errata. So they're not there to, like in War and Peace, to explain what this word means. They're there as part of a puzzle that Wallace wants you to go to experience whatever it is that he decides to put there. It's really part of the fun and entertainment of this book, and that's what makes it one of the most original things I've ever read. So, backing up, what is this about? It was written in 1996, or published in 1996. I think it took him 3 years to write. And the book mainly, it has three plot lines, I would say. One is the tennis academy and the Incandenza family that is heavily involved in the tennis academy, either involved in some way with the academy itself, or in the case of one of the sons, and I think the other one, I think both sons are in the tennis academy, but Hal is the tennis protege. So that's the main plot line. And then the second plot line comes in, I think at about page 200, and that's the halfway house, the nearby halfway house, which, as it turns out, some of the characters of the book end up there or have been there. And then the third plot is this dangerous piece of media that I think is in the form of a VCR tape and is so dangerous to consume that it might cause something really awful to happen. That was the most confusing plot line for me. So here are three things I wanted to say about this book. I have some notes here. Number one, just dive right in. I mean, sure, you can read the literary, scholarly writing, and that might be fun. I didn't. I just dove right in. Just that I wanted to experience very unique writing. And number three, I didn't understand everything I was reading, referring back to mostly that third plot line, but also just some parts of the book were hard to understand where he was going, but I just kept on going. There are other parts of this book that aren't funny and that are serious and heartbreaking. So the book's messaging to me is a commentary on commercialism and growing consumerism. This was written again in 1996. So I feel like David Foster Wallace is being very prescient with his thoughts on what is the future of us. And and also how media and technology was going to play a really big part in our lives, and his concern about that. That's my take on this book. The chapters are famously named after consumer products and not numbered. So you get the idea, or you're supposed to get the idea, that each year of our lives is no longer called 1997, 1998, that instead the year of glad, meaning glad trash bags, and then there's another chapter that starts 1st April, year of the Tux medicated pad. Oh my God. I was flipping through this book before I started talking about it, and I just got back into that world so easily, and it brought back my delight and frustration and challenge of this book all over again. So I will drop you back into the rest of this video. The next book is The Constant Nymph, which was written in 1924 by Margaret Kennedy. And the reason I wanted to mention it here is that it was one of those doorways that was open to me because I had such a wonderful experience with The Constant Nymph. I went on to read other Margaret Kennedys and other books that were written in the same time by her contemporaries. So it was a gateway book for me. The reason that it stands out is that it's written in 1924 about a family, in particular, a 14-year-old daughter of the family named Tessa, who falls in love with this artist that keeps visiting them. The family itself is an unusual family. Do they live in a Swiss town or something? They're bohemian, and bohemian for the time. So Margaret Kennedy is exploring this life that wouldn't be normal. And so I suppose that was unique for the time it was written. And she seems to just do it so well. Tessa falls in love with this artist, and the artist marries Tessa's cousin, but she remains in love with him, and the story takes a really interesting turn towards the end and the end. I would recommend not reading anything about this book before reading it. It really is enjoyable the more that I didn't know. And so I went on to read The Feast by Margaret Kennedy, which is another book that's oddly done. Really unusual setup with The Feast. The next two books are ones that were seminal books for me. And as it turns out, they were both the first book that each one of these authors wrote. So the first one is Virginia Woolf's A Voyage Out. So I was reading a few Virginia Woolf books with a read-along last year through Bookstagram. So we started with The Voyage Out. I had never read any Virginia Woolf. And I actually enjoyed this book as much as Mrs. Dalloway, which I read after that. So this was written in 1915. It's about a couple who is going away on a voyage to a South African remote town, and they have to leave their children or their child. And so as you drop into the scene where they're getting ready to get on the ship, and the mother is so distraught leaving her children, and I could really relate to that. I loved the writing there. And they are met by their niece, Rachel, who's taking the voyage also. And so this setup of the ship is a perfect character study for Virginia Woolf to play around with. And you get to see the interactions with the parents, the couple with themselves. You get to see Rachel and how she connects with her aunt and uncle, but then you get introduced to the characters on the ship, and then how Rachel is interacting with those characters. And I read somewhere that this book also introduces Mrs. Dalloway, which I don't recall, but I do recall knowing at the time, and that was so cool. It was such a great setup for me reading Mrs. Dalloway next. So just a memorable reading experience, and I highly recommend it. The next one is E.M. Forster's first book. So I was also in a read-along. These are casual read-alongs with some connections on Bookstagram last year, and it was an E.M. Forster, and so I was interested in that because I had not read an E.M. Forster. So we started off with his first book, which is Where Angels Fear to Tread, and I could not believe that I was reading a novel that was written at the time. I think this is also turn of the century, that still felt as modern, that could be written today. The way that E.M. Forster writes humanity, I went on to read Howard's End after that, but I have to say Where Angels Fear to Tread was my favorite of those two books. The way that he writes not just humanity, but a story that would have been, the way that these characters are, would have been non-standard, and I guess I'm attracted to that kind of book. But we're following a young widow who has a child, I think, and leaves the child behind and wants to go on a break to Italy. So she finds herself in an Italian town, and she eventually falls madly in love and marries a poor Italian guy. They seem like a decent couple, but you see that there's going to be cracks in the veneer, that there are going to be problems, but you're happy for the young widow that she's found someone to love, even though you can see tragedy maybe in the horizon. I was hoping for the best, though. Her family, her in-laws, are freaking out, and of course send some of the family members to immediately talk sense into the niece. And so there's hijinks there. It's funny at times, and then it takes an unexpected turn in the end. I thought the end was brilliant. I thought the surprise was so well done. So you have to not read the flap or the back of the book when you're starting in on the story, because I loved not knowing anything about what happens. And many times, even the back of a book will mention what happens in the end. Highly recommend. All right, another contemporary book is that was an introduction to an author to me, and also I haven't stopped thinking about, is Hotel Silence by Auður Ava Ólafsdóttir. She's an Icelandic author. I don't think Hotel Silence is her first book. I think she wrote Miss Iceland or something like that beforehand. But Hotel Silence was my first Ólafsdóttir book. And it's about a man who, heartbroken, his wife has left him. I think he has a young daughter, and he's been horribly depressed. He comes up with the idea that he's sadly going to end his life. He wants to do it in a way that his family doesn't find him. So he makes plans to go to a war-ravaged country and specifically a small town. He packs his bag, he has a suitcase, he arrives in the town and stays at this run-down hotel. It's war-ravaged, so everything is run down. This takes place, by the way, in contemporary times, but not clear what year. So he arrives at the hotel, he's got his suitcase. In his suitcase are the tools that he's going to need there are some, I think, young people or a family or a couple, I'm not clear anymore, who's bought this hotel, but they're trying to make the most of it, and there's lots of repairs that need done. They're just trying to make the place stayable, and they happen to notice that he's brought some tools. Maybe they had come into the room and they saw some things from his suitcase, and they ask him, "Are you a handyman?" And he doesn't want to be engaging with people. And all I'll say from there is it is also a story about humanity. It's a story about how just the slightest turn of events, right person who's become involved in something before they know it, and find just enough of a spark of someone needing them that is surprising to them and is just a joy. So thanks for hanging in there. Please share with me your experience with any of these books or authors. I would love to hear from you. And thanks for joining me again.